Hello and welcome to earlymusicsources.com. My name is Elam Rotem, and today, with the help of the singer and scholar Lisandro Abadi,
Hi.
we will try to tackle the question: to vibrate or not to vibrate when singing music from the 16th and 17th centuries. A common notion of the so-called modern school of singing is that vibrato is a natural part of a healthy voice. In the early music world, however, there is a widespread belief that vibrato is a mere ornament that may be used sometimes, but that singing with vibrato all the time is unhistorical and should be avoided. In this episode, we will examine sources from the 16th and 17th centuries that seem to discuss vocal vibrato, and experience the challenge of drawing conclusions in this highly complicated and controversial field. Let's start.
There are different kinds of vibrato of pitch, vibrato of dynamics, and possibly others. The term vibrato itself was not in use until the 19th century. The words or concepts used in historical terminology for things that might be close to the modern term vibrato are varied and inconsistent. Take these points into account when following the episode.
Many sources mention vibrato in different ways, but in most sources, the vibrato seems to be a local phenomenon that happens occasionally, an ornament that may be used selectively. Some sources, however, seem to describe certain kinds of vocal undulations which are not only occasional ornaments, but are or may become an intrinsic element of the singing voice, either by nature or by habit. These sources are the focus of this episode. As you will see, some sources can be interpreted in different ways, and some might seem more convincing than others. We will start with two Italian sources from around 1600. Ludovico Zacconi, in his book Pratica di Musica from 1592, used the term tremolo in connection with light trembling of the voice. The tremolo in music is not necessary, but when used, it not only demonstrates sincerity and passion, it also adorns the songs. The tremolo, that is, the trembling voice, is the true door for singing diminutions, because a ship sails more easily when it is already moving than when it is first set into motion. And a jumper jumps better if before he jumps he takes a running start. The tremolo should be slight and pleasing, for if it is exaggerated and forced, it tires and annoys. Its nature is such that once used, it must always be used, so that its use will become a habit. So, according to Zacconi, a certain light trembling of the voice is something that the singer may add for the sake of beauty and expression. This will help with the singing of diminutions, and if used, it should always be used. More or less in the same period, there is Luigi Zenobi's letter on the perfect musician, where he describes in detail the set of skills each musician is expected to have. He mentions several ornaments that should be used generally, even when not adding any diminutions. These are trillo, tremolo, ondeggiamento, and esclamazione. The ondeggiamento, a certain undulation of the voice, is mentioned in particular in the case of the soprano singer. Deve il soprano di più avere l'ondeggiar della voce. The soprano must have an undulating movement of the voice. While the nature of this undulation is not completely clear, as well as whether this is an intrinsic quality of the voice or just a common kind of ornament, there are sources that praise soprano singers for the sweet trembling of their voice. In some cases, the descriptions include specifically the verb ondeggiare. Check the footnotes for more details.
These were two Italian authors. Let's see what authors from the same period but in other countries have to say about it.
Georg Quitschreiber, in his book Decanendi Elegantia from 1598, supplied a rather straightforward statement about the voice. Tremula voce optime canitur. A wavering voice is best for singing. While this may be taken as a proof for the preference of an undulating voice in general, it might also be interpreted as a description of a voice that is flexible enough to be able to execute ornaments and diminutions. Clearer statements are given by Michael Praetorius in his Syntagma Musicum from 1619. In a section titled How to Teach the New Italian Style to Boys Who Show a Special Joy and Love for Singing, he writes on 2 occasions that a singer must possess a beautiful, lovely, trembling and wavering voice. Zittern und bebende Stimme. Although connected specifically with boy sopranos and not with singers in general, this is a rather convincing source that suggests that a certain wavering quality is generally desired in a voice. Interestingly, almost identical statements were repeated throughout the 17th century by other German authors, always in connection with a natural vocal disposition as opposed to acquired skills. A seemingly contradictory statement is found in the middle of the century by the composer and theorist Christoph Bernhard. He writes that fermo, or the maintenance of a steady voice, is required on all notes, except where a trillo or ardire is applied. Then he explains that a tremolo is a defect that can be heard, for example, in the voices of elderly singers that are no longer able to hold their voices steady. We can imagine that what he describes is a certain wobble, a slow and wide vibration that also today is considered a negative quality. Other descriptions of unpleasant or exaggerated tremolo are found in other sources, connected either with defects of old age, illness, or with sounds of animals, typically goats. But we should wonder what Bernhard would have said about Praetorius's boy singers with their lovely trembling voices. Would he consider it close enough to his fermo or as a defect? Interestingly, as late as 1686, Wolfgang Michael Milius, a student of Bernhard, is one of the writers who quoted Praetorius's statements advocating a preference for wavering voices. By the end of the century, a further confirmation of the taste for vocal undulation can be found in Roger North's writings on how to train the voice. He describes with the help of a drawing 3 ways of singing a long note, and classifies them according to the level of the student. The first is a plain note, which begins with a soft air and fills by degrees to a strength, and then softens away again into a temper and so vanishes. The second is a waved note. It includes a gentle and slow wavering, such as trumpets use, as if the instrument were a little shaken with the wind of its own sound. But not so as to vary the tone, which must be religiously held to its place, like a pillar on its base, without the least loss of the accord. It's interesting that he insists that this waved note is nevertheless a steady and firm one, possibly firm enough also for Bernhard's fermo sound? The last and most advanced way is the trillo, where according to his text and drawing, the differentiation between the notes is evident.
As you can see, there are not so many references to vibrato, or to something that we could interpret as vibrato which is not local or ornamental. It seems that writers from the 16th and 17th centuries were less obsessed with it than we are. Some might suggest that this by itself is a proof that vibrato did not exist. But modern scholars who have tried to prove that have always had to slightly suppress or creatively interpret some of the sources.
A completely different body of evidence that might be helpful in the search for historical vibrato is related to organs. Let's see.
Starting in the early 16th century, organs had stops which produced a beating or wavering effect. In Italy, a stop often called voce umana, human voice, or fifaro, was purposely slightly detuned to create a light vibrato-like effect when combined with the principale stop. Costanzo Antegnati, the famous organ builder, wrote in 1608 that the name voce umana is appropriate for this register due to its sweet harmony. He added that the wavering voce umana is appropriate for slow music and should be played legato. Other contemporary sources connect the voce umana also with solemnity and sadness. Another organ stop with a practically identical name, vox humana, and other variants of it, is a reed stop that is found in organs throughout Europe. It is used mainly for melodic solos, and according to many sources, it is best combined with a tremulant stop, a mechanical modification of the airflow in the organ that creates a wavering sound. Marin Mersenne, in his well-known treatise Harmonie universelle from 1636, wrote that a perfect tremulant shall be obtained if it does not modify the pipes too much, and if it beats in such a way that will allow the organ stops to imitate the trembling of human voices. Similar remarks are found in other sources, leading us to believe that many organ builders heard a certain undulation or pulsation in the human voice and tried to imitate it. However, those instrumental imitations of the human voice were sometimes criticized, perhaps due to the sensitive nature of the voce umana and tremulant mechanisms. Often they did not function well and were said to sound like an ill person with fever. From the 18th century onwards, another criticism concerning specifically the vox humana reed stop is that it sounds too harsh or nasal to be considered human. Other than the organ, there are many sources that describe the various kinds of tremolo as imitations of the human voice. Treatises for instruments such as flutes, violins, viols, and clavichords. Other types of instrumental undulations not connected to the human voice are mentioned in scores and treatises for lutes, traverso, trumpets, and other instruments.
So, to vibrate or not to vibrate? Is that even the question? It is quite certain that in older times there were different kinds of vocal techniques, and that they were probably quite different from vocal techniques nowadays. But focusing only on the aspect of vibrato, as we just did on this episode, is a rather superficial way of dealing with this very complicated matter.
However, it was important for us to point out that, contrary to common belief, some sources in the 16th and 17th centuries quite clearly document the existence of some kind of vocal vibrato.
So, if some director is asking you to avoid vibrato completely, know that he or she is taking a rather extreme approach, which is based mostly on their personal aesthetic preference. This was our show about vocal vibrato in the 16th and 17th centuries. We hope you enjoyed it. Many thanks to Lisandro Abadi for his knowledgeable contributions. Don't forget to check the special page on our website with all the footnotes and other extra information. If you enjoy Early Music Sources, consider supporting it on Patreon. Comment, share, and like. See you next time at earlymusicsources.com.